She wasn't even finished speaking when he laughed. Not a polite laugh, not an awkward one. A loud, cutting, deliberate laugh, the kind designed to make someone feel small in front of a room full of people. Marcus Vell, second in command of the Harro Empire, pointed one manicured finger at the woman standing near the grocery store entrance and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You really think a man like Jackson Harro is going to look twice at something like that?" The woman didn't cry. She didn't run. She just stood there holding a bag of groceries in a child's hand and stared at him with eyes that carried something he would never understand: dignity. That moment was the beginning of everything. And it was the moment Jackson Harro, watching from behind a set of dark sunglasses, felt something crack open inside his chest. If this story already has your attention, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Jackson Harro did not believe in love. He believed in leverage. He believed in the weight of a signed contract, the silence of a man who knew better than to speak, and the particular kind of loyalty that only money could buy. He believed in the 47th floor of a glass building in downtown Chicago, where his name was etched into the door, and where every person who entered that room did so with their hands slightly trembling. He believed in power. He understood power the way some men understand music, not just hearing it, but feeling it move through the walls. What he did not believe in, could not quite make himself trust, was the idea that any human being on this earth could look at him, really look at him, and want nothing. Everyone wanted something. His mother had wanted security. His first girlfriend had wanted status. His business partners wanted access. His enemies wanted his seat. And the women who smiled at him across restaurant tables, who touched his arm and laughed too brightly at everything he said, they wanted the life that came with the name. The cars, the penthouse, the international travel, the feeling of standing next to someone the world was afraid of. Jackson was 41 years old, worth $400 million, and he had never once, not once, sat across from a person who made him feel like just a man. That thought lived in him like a splinter, small, deep, impossible to ignore. It was on a Tuesday evening, the kind of Tuesday that felt like it had lasted 3 weeks, when he sat alone in his office after everyone else had gone home. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand that he hadn't touched. He had a view of the city that most people would have given years of their life to possess. And he had a question turning over and over in his mind like a stone in a river. If I had nothing, would anyone stay? He didn't say it out loud. He had too much pride for that. But it sat there heavy and honest in the quiet of a room where nothing was ever quiet. His phone buzzed. Marcus. He let it go to voicemail. Marcus Vell had been with him for 11 years, efficient, ruthless when necessary, good at reading rooms and terrible at reading people. He was the kind of man who confused obedience for loyalty and cruelty for strength. Jackson had tolerated it because Marcus was useful, because the empire needed men who didn't hesitate, because sentiment was a liability in the kind of business Jackson ran. But lately, Marcus had been doing something that Jackson found increasingly difficult to overlook. He had been mean, casually, publicly, unnecessarily mean, to staff, to people on the street, to anyone he judged in his quick and careless way to be beneath him. Jackson refilled his glass and didn't drink it. He thought about the woman from earlier that day. He hadn't meant to be there. He rarely went to that part of the building, the lower lobby near the service entrance where deliveries came through. But he'd taken the wrong elevator, punched the wrong floor, and stepped out into a corridor he didn't recognize. And then he'd heard the laugh, Marcus's laugh. He'd turned the corner just in time to see it. A woman, maybe mid-30s, carrying 2 bags of groceries and holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6. She'd said something Jackson hadn't caught the beginning of it. Something polite. Something that required nothing in return. And Marcus had looked at her the way a person looks at something they consider beneath contempt. And he had laughed and he had said those words. "You really think a man like Jackson Harro is going to look twice at something like that?" The little girl had pressed herself against the woman's leg. The woman had said nothing. She had simply held her ground, looked at Marcus with a steadiness that most grown men in Jackson's world couldn't manage, and then she'd walked past him like he was a door she'd already decided wasn't worth opening. Jackson had stood there for a moment longer than he should have, then he'd gone back to his office. He'd sat down, he'd poured a drink he didn't touch, and he'd started thinking. The thought, when it fully arrived, was almost embarrassing in its simplicity. What if I disappeared? Not literally, not permanently. But what if Jackson Harro, the empire, the name, the building with his name on the door, what if all of it just went quiet for a while? What if he stepped outside of it the way you step outside of a house into the rain just to feel something real? What if he became nobody? What if he became a man? He turned the idea over carefully, the way he turned over every idea, looking for the weakness in it, the place where it would collapse. He found several. He cataloged them. And then he set them aside because underneath the doubt was something that felt uncomfortably like need. He needed to know. If he walked into a room with nothing, no name, no money, no shadow of $400 million behind him, would anyone see him? Would anyone stay? He picked up his phone. Not to call Marcus back, to call someone else. "Dominic," he said when the line connected. "I need you to set something up for me, and I need it to stay between us." There was a pause. Dominic had been with Jackson for 16 years. He did not ask unnecessary questions. "What kind of something?" "A different life," Jackson said. "Temporary, clean, a new name, a new apartment, a new job, something ordinary. I need it to look real." Another pause, longer this time. "Jackson, are you in trouble?" "No." "Are you—" Dominic stopped himself, chose a different word. "Are you okay?" Jackson looked at the untouched glass of whiskey, at the city below him full of people living ordinary lives, arguing about ordinary things, loving each other in ways that had nothing to do with leverage or loyalty purchased by fear. "Not yet," he said, "but I'm working on it." 3 days later, Jackson Harro ceased to exist. In his place stood a man named Jax Maroro. No middle name, no impressive history, nothing to recommend him except a quiet manner and a face that, without the tailored suit and the particular way powerful men hold their shoulders, was just a face. He rented a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat in a small town called Millhaven, 2 hours outside of Chicago. He signed a lease with a cashier's check because Jax Maroro did not have a credit history. He bought furniture from a second-hand store. He wore clothes from a place that had 3 locations in the strip mall and sold things in plastic packaging. He took a job at a grocery store called Hargrove's Fresh Market. His first day, he almost quit. Not because the work was hard. He had done harder things with his hands than stack canned goods and count change. But because of the way the shift manager, a 23-year-old named Todd, spoke to him. Not rudely, not intentionally unkind, just with the particular casual thoughtlessness of someone who has never once had to consider that the person in front of him might matter. "You're the new guy," Todd said, not looking up from a clipboard. "Produce section. You know how to tell if an avocado's ripe?" "I can learn," Jackson said. Todd finally looked at him, seemed to find nothing particularly interesting. "Yeah, okay, don't squeeze too hard. Customers hate the bruised ones." That was it. That was the entirety of his welcome. Jackson Jax went to the produce section and learned about avocados. By the end of the first week, he had learned several other things as well. He had learned that his back ached in a way it never had before, because standing on concrete for 8 hours was different from standing on the marble floors of a boardroom. He had learned that the break room smelled like burned coffee and someone's leftover fish, and that there was an unspoken hierarchy even here who got which locker, whose food was, whose which conversations you were included in, and which ones went quiet when you walked in. He had learned that the people who worked at Hargrove's were without exception more interesting than anyone he'd sat across from at a boardroom table in years. There was a woman named Patrice who worked the deli counter and was putting herself through nursing school 1 class at a time. There was an older man named George who had worked there for 22 years and knew every regular customer by name and by their standing preference for paper or plastic. There was a teenager named Kyle who showed up every day 10 minutes early and spent his breaks reading, and who would Jackson suspected be running something significant before he was 30. And then there was the reading program. He noticed it the first Thursday afternoon when a side door near the customer service desk opened and a parade of children came through. 8 of them, maybe 9, ranging in age from maybe 5 to 10, walking in a line with the focused energy of kids who knew where they were going and were excited to get there. They disappeared into what Jackson had assumed was a storage room. He found out from Patrice that it wasn't a storage room anymore. Miss Kylie converted it, Patrice said, slicing turkey with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done a thing 10,000 times. About 8 months ago, she runs a reading program out of there every Thursday and Saturday. Mr. Hargrove lets her use the space as long as she keeps it clean. Those kids, most of them don't have books at home. Some of them don't have much of anything. And she does this voluntarily? Jackson asked. Patrice gave him a look, not unkind, but slightly pointed. Some people do things because they matter, not because somebody's paying them to. He felt that land somewhere specific. He didn't respond to it. He saw her for the first time 2 hours later. She came out of the back room with a child on each side of her, both of them talking at once, and she was laughing a real laugh, not performed, not designed to impress anyone. She was a woman of comfortable size, wearing a yellow cardigan and sensible shoes, with hair that was doing approximately what it wanted, and reading glasses pushed up on top of her head that she clearly kept forgetting about. She looked, Jackson thought, like someone who was deeply at home in her own life, even in the middle of a grocery store. She noticed him staring. He looked away. Too late. You must be the new guy, she said, stopping near the produce section with a friendliness that seemed completely unconditional. I'm Kylie. I run the Thursday reading group. Jax, he said. Maroro, I just started this week. I know. Patrice mentioned you. She tilted her head slightly, the way people do when they're actually curious and not just being polite. Where are you from originally? The question was so ordinary that it almost threw him. He had a backstory. Dominic had helped him build, one clean and simple, hard to verify. Ohio, he said. Small town. Moved around a lot after that. She nodded like that was a complete and sufficient answer, which was a thing that wealthy people almost never did. Wealthy people always wanted more. More detail. More context. More of the story to measure you against. Kylie just nodded and said, Well, good to meet you, Jax from Ohio. And then she went back to her kids. He watched her for a moment, not in the way he was aware it might look, but in the way a man looks at something that surprises him. She had turned back to the children immediately, completely. She was not thinking about him. She was not managing an impression. She was just there, present, fully. He could not remember the last time he'd been in a room with someone who was simply entirely there. 2 weeks passed. Jackson settled into a rhythm that he had not expected to find comfortable, and did find, against all his predictions, strangely grounding. He woke up early. He walked to work. The apartment was 6 blocks from Hargrove's. He learned the produce section with a thoroughness that mildly alarmed Todd. He ate lunch alone at first, and then gradually not alone, because George started sitting with him, and George, it turned out, had opinions about everything, and delivered them with the kind of warm authority that made you want to hear more. He thought about Marcus sometimes, about the office, about the machinery of his actual life which was running without him. Dominic was managing it, had assured him 3 separate times, via encrypted message, that everything was stable, that Jackson's absence was being explained as a personal retreat, that no one was asking questions that didn't have good answers. He thought about the woman from the lobby, the one Marcus had laughed at. He still didn't know her name. He thought about Kylie. This was the part he hadn't planned for. He had expected in the abstract that he might meet people during this experiment. He had expected to observe them, to gather data, to discover something useful about the nature of human connection when stripped of wealth and status. He had not expected to find himself looking forward to Thursday afternoons. He had not expected to care whether she was there. The 3rd Thursday, he found an excuse to be near the customer service desk when the children arrived. He was reorganizing a display of boxed crackers that did not need reorganizing. Kylie came in through the back, carrying a canvas tote bag, heavy with books. She was running slightly late. He could tell by the way she was moving the small crease of concentration between her brows. She almost walked past him without seeing him, and then she stopped. Jax, you're early today. Finishing up a display, he said. She looked at the crackers, which were perfectly aligned and clearly did not need him. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted slightly, not suspicious, not unkind, just seeing, like she was registering something and filing it away without comment. "One of my kids is struggling," she said, surprising him. "Marcus, not that Marcus different. Marcus, he's 7, he can read the words, but he doesn't understand what they mean. The words come out right, but the story isn't landing for him. Do you have any idea how that feels?" Jackson thought about his entire life, about the way he had mastered the language of power and success, and had not until very recently understood what any of it actually meant. "Yeah," he said, "I think I have some idea." She looked at him again, that same quality of attention, direct, real, not performing interest, but actually having it. "You want to come in sometime? Read with the kids? We can always use another person." He almost said no. The reflex was immediate: stay back, stay invisible, don't make this complicated. "Sure," he said instead. She smiled at him. Just a real smile. Nothing behind it, nothing calculated, nothing that wanted anything, just pleased. He spent the rest of his shift thinking about that smile. The following Saturday, he read to 4 children for 45 minutes. He read a book about a dog who wanted to go to the moon. He read it badly at first, too flat, too quiet, the way a man reads who has not read aloud to a child since he was a child himself. And then the smallest kid, a girl named Priya, who couldn't have been more than 5 and had absolutely no patience for self-consciousness, climbed up beside him on the bench and pointed at a picture and said, "The dog is scared. Do the scared voice." So he did the scared voice. The children laughed. Kylie from across the room where she was working with 2 older kids looked up, caught his eye, and smiled again in a way that was different from the first time, warmer, more private, like something had been confirmed. He didn't know what to do with any of it. He was not a man accustomed to not knowing what to do. That evening, sitting in his second-hand chair in his apartment above the laundromat, he sent Dominic a message. "Still planning to be back in 6 weeks, he typed. Then he put the phone down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Because the thing he hadn't said, the thing he was not yet ready to look at directly, was that 6 weeks no longer felt like enough. That something was happening in this small, ordinary life that had not happened in his actual life in longer than he could accurately remember. He was starting to feel not observed, not managed, not admired or feared or strategically appeased. He was starting to feel known, not fully, not yet. They had spoken maybe a dozen times. She knew almost nothing about him. What she knew was invented. But the version of himself he was with her, quieter, more careful, more honest, somehow even within the lie, felt irrationally more true than the man in the 47th floor office. That was the thought he couldn't shake. He was lying about everything, and he had never felt more like himself. The knock on his apartment door came at 9 o'clock that same evening. He wasn't expecting anyone. He never had visitors here. Dominic knew better. He stood slowly, moved to the door. He opened it. Marcus Vell stood in the hallway. Not the 7-year-old Marcus who couldn't connect words to meaning. The other Marcus. His Marcus. Immaculate as always. Looking at the apartment with an expression he was not quite hiding fast enough. "How did you find me?" Jackson said. It was not a question. "You're not as invisible as you think," Marcus said. "Can I come in?" Jackson stepped aside. Marcus entered, looked around, said nothing for a moment. Then he turned and said, "The Delgado situation is escalating. Vitali is making noise in the East, and there is a name that's come up 3 times in the last week that I think you need to hear. I wouldn't be here if it could wait." Jackson looked at him. At this man who had laughed in a corridor, at a woman holding a child's hand. At this man who was in the geometry of Jackson's actual life, one of the most important pieces. "Give me 24 hours, Jackson said. Marcus stared at him. "Jackson." 24 hours, Marcus. Then I'll hear the name." Marcus looked around the apartment one more time. His jaw was tight. He was calculating something. Jackson could see it filing this place, these circumstances, into whatever story he was building about what was happening here. 24 hours, Marcus finally said. And he left. Jackson closed the door. He stood with his hand on the knob for a long moment. Outside, he could hear the laundromat machines turning below him. He could hear a car going by on the street. He could hear distantly a child laughing somewhere in the building. Not one of Kylie's kids, just a random child living a random life entirely unaware that the man standing one floor above them was standing at the edge of a decision he didn't have words for yet. He had 24 hours. He thought about what he was going to do with them. He thought about a yellow cardigan, about a real laugh in a grocery store, about a little girl saying, "Do the scared voice," like it was the most natural request in the world. He thought about the thing he had said to Dominic on the phone 3 weeks ago. "Not yet, but I'm working on it." He went to the window, looked out at Millhaven, small and quiet and entirely unmoved by his presence in it, which was, he had discovered, one of the great, unexpected pleasures of his life. Tomorrow Marcus would come back, and Jackson would have to decide before that happened exactly how much of this he was willing to give up, and exactly how much of himself he had already given away without meaning to. 24 hours. Jackson had said it like it was simple, like a man could hold an empire at arm's length for 24 hours and feel nothing pulling at him from the other side. He had been wrong about that. The night after Marcus left, he barely slept. He lay on the second-hand mattress staring at a water stain on the ceiling and listening to the laundromat machines below him churn through their cycles, steady, mechanical, indifferent. And he thought about the name Marcus hadn't given him yet. The one that had come up 3 times in a week. Whatever it was bad enough to make Marcus drive 2 hours outside of Chicago and stand in a doorway looking at a man he didn't fully recognize anymore. Jackson knew that feeling. He barely recognized himself either. But the thing that kept him awake wasn't Marcus or the Delgado situation or Vitali making noise in the east. It was the image he couldn't stop replaying. A woman on a lobby floor, a little girl screaming, and Marcus Vell crouching down to deliver a verdict like a sentence, "Women like you don't get men like him," with the casual confidence of someone who had never once been told he was wrong. At 5 in the morning, Jackson got up. He made coffee with the cheap machine he'd bought at the second-hand store. He stood at the window and watched Millhaven wake up slow, quiet, unremarkable, and he made a decision. He was going to use his 24 hours. He was going to Hargrove's. It was Saturday. Kylie's reading program started at 10. He got there at 9:45, which meant he was stacking orange juice cartons near the back cooler when he heard her come in, not the kids yet. Just her, and she was on the phone, and her voice was tight in a way he hadn't heard before. "I understand that," she was saying, "but you told me the lease was good through the end of the year. You told me—" A pause. No, I'm not. I'm not yelling. I'm asking you to tell me why it changed." Another pause longer. Her voice dropped. Okay, I heard you. Goodbye." She hung up. Silence. Jackson came around the corner of the aisle, slowly giving her a moment, trying to read whether she wanted to be seen. She was standing with her phone in both hands, and her eyes closed and her jaw set. Not crying, not about to cry, just absorbing something painful, the way people absorb physical blows by going still and waiting for the worst of it to pass. "Kylie?" Her eyes opened. She looked at him, and for one unguarded second, there was something raw there, real and unpolished and tired, and then it smoothed over, not falsely, just the way people collect themselves when they remember they're not alone. "Hey, Jax," she exhaled. "Early day for you." "I was already up." He paused. "Everything okay?" She looked down at her phone, back at him, made a small, honest sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "The community center 2 blocks over was going to let me use their space to expand the program. More kids, more books, actual tables instead of folding chairs. I've been working on it for 4 months. She stopped. "They just gave the space to somebody else. Corporate lease, more money." He was quiet for a moment. 4 months. He thought about what 4 months of work looked like to a woman doing this on no budget, on her own time, because it mattered. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it in a way that surprised him, not politely, not as social filler, but genuinely the way you're sorry when you understand exactly what something cost. She looked at him like she noticed the difference. "It's fine," she said, which was clearly not true, but which she meant in the way people mean it when they have no intention of falling apart. "The kids are still coming today. That's what matters." He nodded. "Can I help with setup?" She studied him for a second. "You keep showing up," she said. Not accusatory, just observational. The way she said things direct, quiet, without agenda. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I do." Something shifted in her expression. Not open, not closed, somewhere in the middle like a door that wasn't all the way latched. "Okay," she said. "Come on." The kids arrived in a wave of noise and energy that Jackson had come to genuinely look forward to, which was information about himself that he was still processing. There were 9 of them today. Priya, who had long since decided that Jax was her personal property during reading time, arrived holding a book she had clearly been carrying very carefully, a picture book with a slightly bent corner that she immediately showed him. "I read it by myself," she said. 3 times. 3 times. He crouched to her level. "What's it about? A rabbit who thinks nobody needs her." "May," she said it simply the way children state things that adults spend years finding language for. But they do. They just don't know how to say it. He held her gaze for a second longer than she probably noticed. "That's a good story." "I know," she said, already walking past him to find a spot. Kylie, who had heard the exchange from 2 feet away, said nothing. But when he straightened up and glanced at her, she was looking at him with that quality of attention again, that real, grounded, uncalculated attention that he had no defenses against because he had never needed defenses against it before. He got to work. For the next 2 hours, he sat on the floor with children and read books about rabbits and dragons and a small boy who wanted to understand why the sky was blue. He did voices. He let Priya correct his pronunciation twice, which she did with tremendous authority. He helped a boy named Darnell, who read haltingly but with enormous concentration, sound out a word that had been beating him for 10 minutes. And when Darnell finally got it, photosynthesis of all words in a book about plants, the kid looked up with a grin that Jackson felt somewhere in his chest. Kylie moved through the room like a current, steady present, adjusting without fuss. She would sit beside a child who was struggling and not take the book away, just place her finger beneath the line, patient and quiet, until they found their way through. She knew every child's name, every child's specific difficulty, every child's specific joy. She knew who needed silence and who needed encouragement and who needed to feel like they'd discovered something on their own. He watched her without trying to. He couldn't help it. At noon, when the last child had been collected by the last parent and the folding chairs were stacked against the wall and the room that was not quite a room was quiet again, Kylie sat down on the floor, just sat down right there, like her legs had decided they were done, and leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Jackson sat down beside her, not close, just near. A full minute passed, maybe more. "She read that book 3 times by herself," he said finally. "Priya?" Kylie's eyes were still closed, but she smiled. She couldn't read at all 4 months ago, not a single word. She'd memorized books she'd been read so many times she could recite them perfectly sound like she was reading, but the connection between the marks on the page and the sounds wasn't there. She paused. "Now she reads in bed with a flashlight, and her mom texts me about it." He was quiet. Then, "What made you start this?" She opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling. It took her a moment to answer, and when she did, he had the sense she was giving him the real answer, not the polished one. "I was that kid," she said. "Not the reading thing I always loved reading, but the other part. The part where you walk into a room and the room has already decided who you are before you open your mouth." She paused again. "I figured if I could give these kids something that was completely theirs, a story, a world, something inside their own heads that nobody could take from them or put a number on, then maybe the room couldn't win." Jackson said nothing for a moment. He was thinking about a lobby, about a man crouching down to deliver a verdict. "The room doesn't always get to win," he said. She turned her head and looked at him, really looked, and he made himself hold that look, even though it did something uncomfortable to him the way truth does when you haven't been near it in a while. "No," she said, "it doesn't." He went home 2 hours later. He sat in his chair and did not move for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and called Dominic. "I need you to look into a community center," he said. "Mill Haven, 2 blocks from Hargrove's Fresh Market. There's a corporate lease that just went through. I need the name of whoever signed it, and I need to know if the terms are final." Dominic was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Jackson, don't. I'm not going to. I just want to make sure I understand. You want me to look into a community center in the town where you are currently pretending to be a grocery store employee? Yes. For what purpose? There's a reading program that needs a space. He paused. Find me a way to get them the space. Anonymous. Clean. No trail back to the name. A longer silence this time. The name, Dominic repeated. Jax Maroro doesn't exist, Jackson said. And Jackson Harro isn't here. Figure it out. He hung up. His phone rang immediately. Not Dominic. Marcus. He let it ring. It rang again. He picked up. I said 24 hours, Jackson said. It's been 22, Marcus said. Close enough. The name Jackson. Are you ready? He exhaled slowly. Go ahead. Raymond Cass. The name hit him like something physical. He sat forward in the chair. Raymond Cass had been a peripheral figure in his world for 3 years, a man who moved in the spaces between legitimate business and the kind that didn't get written down anywhere. Smart, patient, the kind of patient that was actually just slow-building ambition. What did he do? Jackson said. He's been talking to 3 of your Eastern partners, Marcus said. Not threatening them, not buying them, just talking. And whatever he's saying, 2 of them have stopped returning my calls. Jackson stood up. He walked to the window. Outside, Millhaven continued its Saturday afternoon with complete indifference. Which 2, he said. Marcus told him. Get me a meeting with the 3rd one, Jackson said. This week. And Marcus? He stopped. What? He thought about a lobby. He thought about a woman on the floor and a child screaming. He thought about whether a man could be useful and wrong at the same time, and how long you could use someone before you became responsible for the things they did in your name. We'll talk about the other thing when I'm back, he said. The other thing, Marcus repeated flat. The woman, in the lobby, 3 weeks ago. A pause. He could hear Marcus recalibrating. Jackson, that was, we'll talk about it when I'm back, he said again and hung up. He stood at the window for a long time after that. The Raymond Cass situation was real. It would require his attention. It would require him to become, at least for the duration of one meeting, the man with his name on the 47th floor, the man who didn't need to raise his voice because the weight behind his words did it for him. But not today. Today there was still 1 hour left of his 24. He put on his jacket and walked the 6 blocks back to Hargrove's. He wasn't expecting Kylie to still be there. The program was over. He didn't have a reason to be there, and he knew it, and he went anyway, which told him something about himself he was only half ready to hear. She was at the customer service desk talking to Mr. Hargrove, a wide gray-haired man in his 60s who ran the store with a pragmatic kindness that Jackson had come to genuinely respect. They were looking at a piece of paper together, and Kylie was saying something, gesturing with her hands, the way she did when she was making a case for something. Jackson stopped near the cracker display, the same one he'd been reorganizing the week before that still didn't need reorganizing. He was close enough to hear. I can run it twice a week instead of 1, Kylie was saying. If I have the space, I can take on 15 kids instead of 9. There are families on the waiting list, Mr. Hargrove, I have 12 kids whose parents called me this month. Hargrove looked at the paper. Kylie, I want to help you. I do. But I've got 2 storerooms, and they're both spoken for come January. The distributor's been after me for months to— I know, she said quickly. I know. I'm not asking for forever. Just give me until I find something. Please. Hargrove rubbed the back of his neck. He was a man trying to do right by competing obligations and finding it harder than he'd expected. Let me think on it, he said finally. I'll let you know by Monday. Kylie nodded. Her hands dropped to her sides. Thank you. She turned and nearly walked directly into Jackson. She stopped, blinked. Jax, you're back. Forgot my jacket, he said. He was wearing his jacket. She looked at his jacket, looked at him. That small knowing shift in her expression, the one that saw things and chose what to say about them. Right, she said, and her voice was almost warm with the gentleness of not calling him out. He cleared his throat. The space thing, he said. I overheard. I'm sorry. She exhaled. It's fine. I'll figure something out. I always do. She looked at him steadily. Don't make that face. What face? The face where you're about to try to fix something. She didn't say it unkindly. She said it the way someone says a true thing. I appreciate it, but I've been navigating this on my own for a while, Jax. I'm okay. Something about the way she said his name, the false name, the invented name, Jax Maroro from Ohio, who didn't exist, landed in him like a splinter going deeper. I know you're okay, he said. I can see that. She tilted her head. Then why do you look at me like that? Like what? She seemed to consider whether to answer. Then quietly, like you're surprised by me. He held her gaze. He wanted to say something true. He had a profound and growing hunger to say something completely true, which was a problem, because the true thing was also the thing that would destroy this whatever this was, this fragile and real thing that had no name yet. Because I am, he said finally, surprised by you. She was quiet for a moment, just present with that the way she was present with things. Well, she said. Okay then. And she picked up her bag, and she walked toward the door. And just before she went through it, she turned back once and looked at him with an expression he couldn't categorize, something between cautious and curious, something that had not decided yet what it was going to be. The door closed behind her. George appeared at his shoulder from absolutely nowhere the way George did. You know what your problem is, George said, stacking apples with the serenity of a man who had watched many young fools make many predictable mistakes. I'm sure you're going to tell me, Jackson said. You're standing on the wrong side of that door, George said simply, and he went back to his apples. Jackson did not follow her. He was not ready for what came after following her. He was not ready for the version of this where she looked at him, and he had to decide in real time, without preparation, how much of the truth he could carry in his hands before he dropped it. Instead, he walked home. He sat in his chair, he looked at his phone, and saw a message from Dominic. Corporate lease on the community center belongs to a holding company registered in Delaware. Shell entity, 3 layers deep. But I found the individual who signed the paperwork on behalf. Do you want the name or do you want me to make it go away quietly? Jackson typed back, make it go away, get them the space. Anonymous Foundation set it up clean, enough to run the program for 3 years. He put the phone down. He thought about what Kylie had said. Don't make that face. The face where you're about to try to fix something. He wasn't fixing something. He told himself that. He was just removing an obstacle. That was different. That was something a person could do without it meaning more than it was. He almost believed himself. His phone buzzed again. Dominic. Done. 3 years fully funded. They'll receive the notification as a community grant from a private foundation. No name attached. And then 60 seconds later, a second message from Dominic that he hadn't asked for. She applied for that grant herself 6 weeks ago, the same foundation under the correct name. She did the paperwork. She followed up twice. They rejected her without explanation. Jackson read that twice. She had tried the right way. She had done everything correctly. She had filled out the forms and followed the process and done exactly what a person was supposed to do, and someone had said no, not for any good reason, but because they could. Because the machine that decided these things ran on criteria that had nothing to do with 12 kids on a waiting list. And she had not given up. She had found another way. She had kept going. He thought about a rabbit who thinks nobody needs her. He thought about a little girl who read by flashlight. He thought about a woman sitting on a floor after everyone had gone tired and still entirely capable of smiling. He thought about his father who had built the first layer of the empire from nothing. Not from nothing easy, from nothing hard, the kind of nothing that bites, and who had said to him once, a long time ago, that the measure of a person was not what they did when things went their way. It was what they did when nothing went their way, and they kept going anyway. His father had been talking about business. Jackson was starting to think it applied to something else. He was in trouble. He understood that now with a clarity that was almost peaceful. He was in serious, complicated, irreversible trouble because the experiment, the careful controlled data gathering experiment, had stopped being an experiment somewhere between a dog who wanted to go to the moon and a woman sitting on a floor with her eyes closed and her jaw set and her whole being quietly insisting that she was fine. She was fine. She was more than fine. And he was lying to her about everything. He got up, walked to the window, pressed his forehead against the cold glass, and stayed there for a moment. Outside, a couple was walking a dog. A teenager was sitting on a stoop looking at a phone. A light went on in a window across the street, warm and yellow, ordinary as anything on earth. He had 22 hours left on his self-imposed deadline. Marcus would come back. The Raymond Cass situation would not wait much longer. His actual life, the one worth $400 million, and a great deal of other people's fear, was circling like a tide patient and inevitable, waiting for him to stop pretending he was something smaller. But he was not ready to go back. Not yet. Not quite. One more day, he thought. One more ordinary day. He had no idea, standing there with his forehead against the cold glass, that ordinary was about to be the last thing that happened to him for a very long time. He gave himself one more day. That was the deal he made with himself at the window, one more ordinary day, and then Monday came and took it without asking. The call from Marcus arrived at 6:47 in the morning. Jackson was already awake, already dressed, already standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold because he'd forgotten to drink it. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes thinking about nothing in particular, and everything at once, which was a new experience for a man who had spent 41 years thinking in straight, purposeful lines. He picked up. "Raymond Cass moved faster than we thought," Marcus said. No greeting, no preamble. "He's not just talking to your Eastern partners anymore. He made contact with somebody inside." Jackson went still. "Who?" "I'm not saying this on a phone." "Marcus." "I'm not saying it on a phone, Jackson. Come home." He set the cold coffee on the counter. He looked at the apartment, the second-hand furniture, the cheap rug, the stack of children's books on the side table that Priya had left behind last Saturday and that he had not moved. He looked at all of it and felt something in him pull in two directions with equal force. "I need 48 hours, he said. The silence on Marcus's end was the kind that had temperature. "You said 24. That became 48. Now you want another 48 on top of that." "Jackson, I have been running interference for 5 weeks. 5 weeks. Whatever you're doing out there." 48 hours, Jackson said. "Then I'm back." He hung up before Marcus could answer. He stood there for a moment. Then he picked up his work apron off the hook by the door and went to Hargrove's. He was stacking shelves when Kylie arrived at 9:32, which he knew because he had glanced at the clock when he heard the back door open, which was information about himself. He filed quietly and did not examine too closely. She came in carrying 2 tote bags and a cardboard box and wearing the yellow cardigan again, and she was talking before she'd fully gotten through the door. "Good news," she said, directing this at no one in particular, and everyone in earshot simultaneously, which was her way. "I got a call this morning from something called the Millhaven Community Trust. Apparently it's a private foundation. I've never heard of it, and they're funding the reading program. 3 years fully covered, space included. The community center on Briar Street just became available again, and Patrice from behind the deli counter let out a sound that was most of the way to a scream. "Are you serious?" "I'm serious." Kylie set the box down on the customer service counter and laughed that real, uncontrolled laugh. "I have no idea who these people are. I applied to every grant I could find 6 weeks ago and heard nothing. And then this morning, out of nowhere." She shook her head. "I don't even care. I'm not looking that horse in the mouth." George, appearing from between aisle 4 and aisle 5 with the regularity of a man who existed slightly outside normal time, said, "Good things happen to people who deserve them, occasionally on schedule." Jackson from the far end of aisle 3 said nothing. He kept his face turned toward the shelf he was working on. He arranged and rearranged a row of soup cans that were already perfectly arranged. He waited for the moment to pass. "Jax?" Kylie's voice closer than he expected. He turned around. She was standing at the end of the aisle, with her arms folded over the top of the cardboard box she was still carrying, looking at him with an expression that was not suspicious and not warm and not cool, just that particular quality of attention that he had no word for, the one that made him feel simultaneously seen and exposed. "You okay?" she said. "Yeah, good news about the program." "It's incredible news." She tilted her head slightly. "You don't look surprised." He held her gaze. "I'm happy for you." She studied him for another second. 2 seconds. The kind of seconds that stretch. Then she said, "Okay," in a tone that meant she had noticed something and chosen not to press it, which was somehow worse than if she had pressed it, because it meant she trusted him enough to let it go. That word, trust, sat in his chest like a coal. She went to set up for the Thursday session. He went back to the soup cans. He stared at them for a while without seeing them. The session that afternoon was different from the ones before, though not in any way Jackson could have predicted. It was louder. There were 11 kids instead of 9 because word had spread about the upcoming move to the community center, and 2 new families had brought their children in early, wanting to see what it was about before committing. One of the new kids was a boy of about 8 named Leon, who came in with his arms crossed and his jaw forward and the careful, practiced expression of a child who had learned that being enthusiastic about things was a liability. Jackson recognized that expression. He had worn it himself for most of his adult life. Kylie handled Leon the way she handled everything, without force, without drama. She didn't make a project of him. She didn't single him out or hover or try too hard. She just let him exist in the room at his own temperature and trusted that the room would do the work. It took 40 minutes. Then Leon picked up a book on his own, opened it, started reading. Kylie caught Jackson's eye across the room. She said nothing. She just gave him a small, private nod like she was sharing something and went back to the child in front of her. He thought about what she had said on the floor of the back room. The part where you walk into a room and the room has already decided who you are. He thought about being 8 years old and deciding that the only safe move was to decide first to get to yourself before anyone else could get there, and what that cost over the long run. He did the voices. He let Priya correct him. He helped Darnell with a new word. He read to Leon eventually when Leon drifted close enough to hear, and he did not acknowledge that Leon was listening, and Leon, who was smart enough to appreciate not being acknowledged, stayed. After the kids left, Jackson helped fold the chairs. "Can I ask you something?" Kylie said. She was on the other side of the table from him, moving efficiently, not looking up. "Yeah." "Why are you here?" He stopped. "I work here. Not here. She looked up. "Millhaven. You said you moved around a lot. You didn't say why you stopped here." He had the backstory. He knew it cold. He and Dominic had built it carefully, full of the kind of plausible detail that resists casual scrutiny. He could have delivered it smoothly, the way he delivered everything with the particular confidence of a man who had spent his career making people believe things that were convenient for him. Instead, he said, "I needed to figure something out." She waited. "Something about myself," he said. "Whether I was—" He stopped. Found the closest true thing he could offer. Whether who I thought I was and who I actually was were the same person. The room was quiet. She had stopped moving. She was just looking at him. "And," she said, "still working on it." She picked up another chair, folded it, set it against the wall. "You know what I think," she said, her back half turned to him. "I think you already know the answer. I think you came here because part of you already knew and you needed somewhere quiet enough to hear it." He didn't respond. He couldn't quite. She turned back around and there was nothing dramatic in her face, no calculation, no bid for something in return, just a person saying a thing they believed to be true. "The kids like you," she said. "Leon especially. He wouldn't sit with anyone else." "He didn't sit with me either." "He sat close enough." She almost smiled. "For Leon, that's the same thing." He walked home in the dark. The air had a bite to it that hadn't been there a week ago, the season turning without announcement the way seasons do. He had his hands in his pockets and his head down, and he was not thinking about Raymond Cass or Marcus or the name that had been said 3 times in a week. He was thinking about a question he had asked himself on a Tuesday evening 47 days ago while staring at a city he owned a meaningful percentage of. If I had nothing, would anyone stay? He had his answer. He had it, and it terrified him, because the answer was yes, but the yes was attached to a lie, and a yes attached to a lie was not actually yes. It was something else, something worse. It was a window you could see through but not open. His phone buzzed. Dominic. Raymond Cass made a move tonight, public. He attended a dinner hosted by 2 of your former partners. He was photographed. He wanted to be photographed. Jackson, this is a declaration. Jackson stopped walking in the middle of the sidewalk. Set up the meeting, he said. The one Marcus wanted. Day after tomorrow, Chicago. You're coming back. Day after tomorrow. He paused. Keep it off the calendar. I don't want Cass to know I'm moving. He pocketed the phone and stood there in the cooling air and understood with the clarity of a man who has run out of time to be unclear that the thing he had been postponing was no longer postponable. He had 48 hours. He spent the first 12 of them doing something he had not done in years, which was sleep. Full, heavy, dreamless sleep in the second-hand bed with the window cracked and the sound of the laundromat below. And when he woke up Thursday morning, there was light coming through the curtain, and for exactly 4 seconds before his brain fully engaged, he felt something he identified later as peace. Then his brain engaged. He went to work. He was quiet, in a way that Patrice noticed and said nothing about, and George noticed and also said nothing about because both of them were in their different ways, too wise to comment on the specific silence of a man making up his mind about something large. At 11:43 in the morning, something happened that he did not see coming. The front door of Hargrove's opened, and Marcus Vell walked in. Not the Marcus who was 7 and learning to read. The other one. Immaculate. Out of place, the way a diamond is out of place in a cereal bowl. He walked directly to the produce section and stopped 3 feet from Jackson, and his expression was the face of a man who had decided that 48 hours was in fact 50 hours too many. "We need to talk," Marcus said. His voice was low, controlled. "Now, Jackson." Jackson looked at him. He was acutely, viscerally aware of where he was in an apron in a grocery store with Patrice 30 feet away and George somewhere behind him, and more critically with the back room door closed but not locked, and the Thursday session starting in 18 minutes. "This is not the place," Jackson said. "You don't get to decide the place anymore," Marcus said, and his voice had an edge to it that Jackson had heard him use on other people, but never on him. "You have been gone for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Cass had dinner with Benedetti and Yarrow last night, in public. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand exactly what it means." Jackson kept his voice level. "Lower your voice." "I will lower my voice when you are back where you belong." Marcus looked around the store with undisguised contempt. The shelves, the fluorescent lights, the deli counter, all of it measured and found ridiculous. "What is this, Jackson? What are you doing here? What is this?" He gestured at the apron, the produce section, the entirety of it, supposed to prove nothing I intend to explain to you right now. "There is a man systematically dismantling your partnerships, and you are standing in a grocery store." Marcus's voice cracked on the last word, not with emotion, but with the strain of keeping emotion out of it. "I have held this together for 6 weeks on instinct and old favors, and I am out of both. Come home." He said it simply at the end, not as a command, almost as a request, and that more than anything else got through because Marcus did not make requests. Marcus did not have the architecture for it. Jackson looked at him for a long moment. Then the back door opened, and Kylie came out carrying the box of books, talking over her shoulder to the first 2 kids who had just arrived behind her. She was laughing at something one of them had said, and she had her glasses pushed up on top of her head, and she was entirely, completely herself, the way she always was. She stopped when she saw Marcus. Not frightened, just registering. The way a person registers a change in the room's weather. Marcus looked at her. And Jackson watched it happen, the assessment, the quick and practiced dismissal, the particular quality of invisibility that Marcus assigned to people he had already categorized. He watched Marcus prepare to say something. "Marcus." Jackson's voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Marcus close his mouth immediately. "Go wait by my car. I'll be 10 minutes. Marcus looked at him, looked at Kylie, back at Jackson. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation. And something that might have been the beginning of understanding, which was more dangerous. He left without another word. The door closed. Kylie watched it close. Then she looked at Jackson. "Friend of yours," she said carefully. "Colleague," Jackson said. She waited. She was very good at waiting. There's something I need to take care of." He took the apron off. He was aware this was wrong, the shape of it, the look of it. He was aware that he was performing exactly the kind of thing he had always been afraid she would see eventually, even though she didn't know what she was looking at yet. "I'm sorry about today's session." "It's fine." She said it gently, not dismissively. "Jax?" She stepped slightly closer, not into his space, just near it. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" The question landed like a stone in still water. He looked at her face, which was asking the question without judgment, without accusation, with nothing except honest concern, the kind of concern that had no angle to it. "Not the kind you're thinking of," he said, which was true. "Okay," she said, and then quieter. "But if you were, you could say so." He held that for a second, the absolute unbearable generosity of it. "I know," he said. He went outside. Marcus was standing beside the car, not Jackson's car, which was in Chicago, but the nondescript sedan he'd been using for 6 weeks, which Marcus was clearly finding personally offensive. Marcus waited until Jackson was close before speaking. "Who is she?" Marcus said. "Nobody." "Jackson." "She's nobody," Jackson said. And the word tasted like exactly what it was, a betrayal. "What do you need from me today, right now, in the next 10 minutes? Marcus studied him for a long moment. Something was happening behind his face, the machinery turning the pieces, assembling themselves into a shape. Jackson could see it, and didn't like it, and couldn't stop it. "Benedetti is the one I'm worried about," Marcus said finally. "If Cass gets him fully, he has access to the northern corridor. Your whole infrastructure above the state line becomes vulnerable. I'll talk to Benedetti myself. He's not going to take a meeting with you through normal channels anymore. Cass has already." "He'll take it," Jackson said. "I'll call him directly, tonight." Marcus paused, then carefully watching Jackson's face as he said it. "The woman, the reading program lady." He said it neutrally, clinically, as if he were reading a file. "She runs something at this store. Leave it alone. Marcus." He said it the way he said things when the conversation was over. "Leave it alone." Marcus went quiet. He had the look of a man who had filed something away in a place he would return to, organized, deliberate, patient. Jackson recognized the look because he had the same one, and it had never once meant anything good for whoever it was pointed at. "Day after tomorrow," Jackson said. "Chicago. Have the Benedetti contact ready." He went back inside before Marcus could respond. He walked past the customer service desk, past the deli counter, where Patrice gave him a look that asked a question he couldn't answer, past the produce section where the avocados were still imperfect and the oranges still needed rotating. He went to the back room. 11 kids were sitting in a rough circle. Priya was already lecturing someone about the correct way to hold a book. Darnell had his reading finger out ready. Leon was in the back corner with his arms crossed, but he was there. He was in the room. Kylie was at the front looking at Jackson as he came in. He sat down. She handed him a book, a new one he hadn't seen before. A story about a man who had traveled very far from home and couldn't remember after a while which direction home was. He looked at the cover for a moment. Then he opened it and started reading. For the next hour and 40 minutes, he was only Jax. He was the man who did the scared voice and let Priya correct him and help Darnell, and did not look away when Leon finally, quietly, without fanfare, moved 3 feet closer to the group. He was present, fully, completely present in a way that his actual life had not allowed in longer than he could measure. When the last kid left and the door closed and the room went quiet, he sat on the floor and did not move right away. Kylie sat across from him, not close, just in the same space, and for a while neither of them said anything. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that exists between people who have moved past the need to fill it. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. He had been wrong about many things in his life, had miscalculated people and situations, and the direction events would move, but he had never been wrong about the moment when something was about to change and could not be stopped. "I have to go back," he said, "to where I'm from." She nodded once, slow, like she had already known and was just waiting for him to catch up. "Is it permanent?" she said. He opened his mouth, closed it. The honest answer was that he didn't know. The true answer was more complicated, that there was no version of what was happening with Raymond Cass that let him stay in Mill Haven, that the Empire did not pause for things like this, that Jackson Harro did not get to be Jax Maroro from Ohio indefinitely because Jackson Harro existed in the world whether he wanted to or not, and the world was now requiring him. "I don't know," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Okay. Kylie. You don't owe me an explanation, Jax." She said it simply. "You've been kind. You've been good with the kids. Whatever's happening with you, I hope you figure it out." She paused. "I mean that. Not as a thing people say. I actually mean it." He looked at her, at this woman who had applied for a grant and been rejected and kept going, who had sat on a lobby floor and looked a cruel man in the eye without flinching, who had built something real from nothing in a back room of a grocery store for children the world had already decided didn't merit a space. He wanted to tell her. Right then, in that moment on that floor, he wanted to dismantle the entire construction, everything Dominic had built, every careful, false detail, every version of Jax Maroro from Ohio that he had been living inside for 6 weeks, and just put the truth down between them and see what happened. He didn't. He wasn't ready. Or she wasn't ready. Or the truth wasn't ready, or more honestly, the truth was ready, and he was afraid of what came after it. He stood up. She stood up. They folded the last of the chairs together and stacked them against the wall without speaking. At the door, he stopped. "The grant," he said. "The community trust. You should know it's real. The funding is real. Whoever they are, they're serious. You can count on it." She tilted her head. "How would you know that?" He looked at her. "I just have a feeling." She studied him for a long moment, and then something shifted in her face, not suspicion, not yet just the first quiet movement of a question forming underneath the surface. The question didn't have words yet, but it was there, and he could see it, and he knew from the precise and unsparing clarity of hindsight that he had just made a mistake. "Okay," she said, quietly. "Good night, Jax. Good night, Kylie." He went home. He packed one bag. He set it by the door. Then he sat in the second-hand chair one last time and looked at the stack of children's books on the side table. He picked up the one on top, the one about the rabbit who thought nobody needed her. He held it for a moment, set it back down. His phone rang. Dominic. "Everything's set for tomorrow night," Dominic said. "Meeting with Benedetti is confirmed. Cass doesn't know you're moving." "Good. Jackson." A pause. "You okay?" He looked at the apartment, at the 6 weeks of an ordinary life stacked in every corner, the cheap rug, the second-hand mug, the apron hanging by the door that he hadn't taken off the hook yet. "Ask me again tomorrow," he said. He ended the call. Outside, Mill Haven was quiet. The laundromat was closed for the night. The couple with the dog had gone in. The light in the window across the street was off. He sat in the dark and thought about a question he had asked himself standing at a city window 47 days ago. If I had nothing, would anyone stay? The answer was yes. And now he had to go back to being everything. And he had no idea, sitting there in that quiet apartment with his bag by the door, that someone else was already asking a question of their own. That across town in a small apartment above a bookstore, Kylie Ellison was sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop open, typing a name into a search engine. A name she had heard said exactly once this afternoon through a window she had not meant to be near. Harro. She didn't know why that name felt familiar. She didn't know yet what she was going to find. She just typed it slowly with the careful deliberateness of a person following a thread they aren't sure they want to pull. The search results loaded. She stared at the screen, and the question she had been forming all evening, the one without words, yet finally found them. The first result was an article from the Chicago Tribune, dated 14 months ago. The headline was straightforward in the way that headlines about powerful men always are, declarative clean, with all the complicated truth buried in the paragraphs below it. Harro Empire expands Eastern Corridor. Jackson Harro consolidates $400 million portfolio. There was a photograph. Kylie stared at it for a long time. The man in the photograph was standing outside a building with his name on it, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, looking directly at the camera with the composed, unreadable expression of someone who had long ago decided that the world did not get to see what was happening behind his eyes. She knew that face. She had read to children beside that face. She had sat on a floor next to that face. She had said goodnight to that face 6 hours ago in a grocery store back room while he looked at her with something she had taken for honesty. She closed the laptop, opened it again. She read the article. Then she read 3 more. She read a profile from a business magazine that described Jackson Harro as a man of deliberate contradictions. Ruthless in negotiation, rarely photographed, known in certain circles for a quality of stillness that people tended to interpret as either patience or danger, depending on which side of the table they were sitting on. She read a piece about his philanthropy, which was apparently real but always anonymous. She read a brief mention of a man named Marcus Vell, described as his second-in-command, who had been involved in an altercation at a Chicago property 14 months ago that had been quietly settled. An altercation. She thought about the man who had come into Hargrove's that afternoon. Immaculate, out of place, looking at her like she was furniture. She thought about a lobby she had never been in and a woman she had never met, and a little girl she didn't know, and she felt a slow, cold understanding move through her like groundwater spreading everywhere at once, filling spaces she hadn't known were empty. She sat at her kitchen table until 2 a.m. She did not call anyone. She did not cry. She made a pot of tea she didn't drink, and she sat with the information the way she sat with hard things, which was quietly and completely giving them their full weight instead of looking for a way to make them lighter. At 2:14, she went to bed. She did not sleep. Jackson left Millhaven at 7 the following morning. He drove the 2 hours back to Chicago in the nondescript sedan with his one bag in the back seat and the radio off, and he thought about Kylie the entire way and told himself he wasn't thinking about Kylie, which was the kind of lie a man tells himself when the truth is too loud to sit beside. He was back in the building with his name on the door by 9:15. He took the elevator to the 47th floor and walked into his office and stood in the middle of it for a moment, feeling the particular quality of a space that has been waiting for you. The air slightly different, the proportions slightly wrong, everything too large and too deliberate and too empty of anything that hadn't been placed there with intention. Dominic was already there. He was at the side table with a coffee and a folder, and the expression of a man who had been awake for longer than was reasonable. "Welcome back," Dominic said. "Brief me," Jackson said. Dominic briefed him. It took 40 minutes and covered Raymond Cass Benedetti, the 2 Eastern partners who had stopped returning calls, and 3 additional developments that had occurred in the last 72 hours that required decisions only Jackson could make. Jackson listened without interrupting. He asked 4 questions. He made 6 decisions. He was, by the time Dominic finished, fully and completely back inside the machinery of his actual life, functioning exactly as he had always functioned, with the calm precision that people in his world called control, and that Jackson himself had never had a word for, because it had never before felt like a choice. It felt like a choice now. "The Benedetti meeting is at 7 tonight," Dominic said. "He'll come to neutral ground. The private room at Calder's." "Good. Marcus wants to debrief before that. He's been—" Dominic paused, choosing his word. "Thorough, in your absence." Jackson looked at him. "Thorough how?" "He's been asking questions. About the town. About what you were doing there." Another pause. "About who you were spending time with." The coal that had been sitting in Jackson's chest since yesterday moved and burned and settled somewhere lower. "Set up the debrief," he said. 1 hour. "And then I want Marcus off independent research. Everything goes through me directly from now on." Dominic wrote something, did not comment on it. This was why Jackson had kept Dominic for 16 years. Marcus arrived at 11 sharp and sat across from Jackson in the conference room with the posture of a man who was being careful. This was new. Marcus was many things, but rarely careful with Jackson. Their relationship had long operated on the assumption that Marcus could speak plainly and Jackson could take it. The carefulness now meant that Marcus had decided something had changed between them, which meant he was right, and he knew it, and he was deciding what to do about it. "Cass is going to make a formal move within the week," Marcus said. "My read is he tries to call a partner summit. Frame it as a stability concern. Your unexplained absence questions about continuity. He'll use the last 6 weeks as evidence that the structure is unreliable." "Let him call it," Jackson said. "I'll be there." Marcus looked at him. "Just like that. Just like that." A silence. Then Marcus, with the careful deliberateness of a chess player placing a piece, "The woman from Millhaven." Jackson said nothing. "I ran her name," Marcus said. "Kylie Ellison, 34. No significant assets. Runs an unofficial reading program out of a grocery store. Applied for a community grant 6 weeks ago and was rejected." He paused. "And then 3 days ago, a private foundation nobody has ever heard of funded her program for 3 years and handed her a community center on Briar Street." He looked at Jackson. "Anonymous donor." The silence between them was different from the silences they'd had before. It had content, weight, shape. "Marcus," Jackson said slowly, "stop. Is she a liability?" "She is not a liability." "Jackson, she is not a liability, she is not a target, she is not relevant to anything we are doing, and if I find out you have run her name through any other channel than the one you just told me about, we will have a problem that makes Raymond Cass look manageable." His voice was quiet the entire time. It didn't need to be anything else. "Are we clear?" Marcus held his gaze for a long moment. He was calculating. Jackson could see it the way Marcus calculated everything, measuring angles, weighing outcomes, deciding what was worth the cost. "Clear," Marcus said, but his eyes said something different, and Jackson, who had been reading Marcus Vell for 11 years, knew exactly what they said. This is not over. He was right. The Benedetti meeting went well, which was to say, it went the way Jackson's meetings always went, when he was the one running them quietly with precision, with the exact right amount of said and unsaid, so that by the end, Benedetti was leaning forward instead of back, and his handshake at the door was the handshake of a man who had remembered which side of things he actually belonged on. Cass's move on the northern corridor was effectively blocked before it had fully formed. Jackson drove home at 10:15 with the satisfied and slightly hollow feeling of a problem solved and another one already forming behind it. This was his life. This was the architecture of his days. One problem solved, one forming. The empire was a living thing, and living things were always metabolizing, always requiring, always in the process of becoming something or dying. He had understood this for 20 years. He had built it. He had chosen it. He sat in his actual apartment, not the second-hand one, the real one, penthouse 43rd floor, a view that cost a number with 7 digits, and he poured a drink and looked at the city and waited to feel at home. He was still waiting when he fell asleep in the chair at midnight. He woke up at 6 and called Dominic. "I need you to check something," he said. "Millhaven, Hargrove's Fresh Market. I want to know if there's been any unusual contact, anyone asking questions about a temporary employee named Jax Maroro." Dominic was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "When did this become a concern?" "Yesterday." "Marcus." "Check it," Jackson said. "Today." He went to the office. He worked. He made decisions. He moved pieces across a board that most people would never see in a game, most people didn't know was being played. He was good at it. He had always been good at it, and the goodness of it, the competence gave him a kind of satisfaction that he recognized as real, even as he recognized it was not the same as the other thing. The thing he'd felt on a floor in a back room with 11 children and a woman in a yellow cardigan and a book about a man who forgot which direction home was. The call from Dominic came at 4:17 in the afternoon. "Someone ran Jax Maroro this morning," Dominic said. "Thin search, just the name, employment verification, basic background. Whoever did it knew what they were looking for, was probably not going to be there. They stopped fast." Jackson's grip on the phone tightened by a fraction. "Who?" The search originated from an IP address registered to an apartment above a bookstore on Millhaven's east side. A pause. "Jackson." It was her. He put the phone down. He sat with that information for a long time. He sat with it, the way she had described, sitting with things, giving it full weight, not trying to make it lighter. She had searched his name. She had found something, found him, the real him, the one with the building and the photograph and the $400 million. And then she had searched Jax Maroro and found the careful nothing that Dominic had constructed, and the nothing would have confirmed what the something had already told her. She knew, or she knew enough. And she hadn't called. She hadn't shown up. She had searched a name, found what she found, and gone quiet. He understood that too, because what do you do with that? What do you do when the person you thought you were getting to know turns out to be wearing a face that isn't his? He picked up his phone, scrolled to her number. He had it from the volunteer sign-up sheet for the reading program, which he was aware was a thing that was not entirely comfortable to examine. His thumb hovered over it for a long moment. He put the phone down. He was not ready. Or she wasn't ready. Or the space between those two things was too complicated to cross with a phone call. He was still sitting there when his door opened and Marcus walked in. Jackson had not given him permission to enter. Marcus had never needed to ask before. He came in the way he always had, direct, purposeful, certain of his access, and he set a tablet on the desk in front of Jackson without preamble. On the tablet was a photograph. It was Marcus himself, taken without his knowledge, in what looked like a parking lot outside a building Jackson recognized after a moment as the community center on Briar Street in Millhaven. The building that the anonymous foundation had just given to Kylie's program. Marcus was talking to a man Jackson didn't recognize. "Who took this?" Jackson said. "Benedetti's people. They've been watching Cass's movements, and Cass apparently has someone watching ours." Marcus sat down across from him. "That man Marcus is talking to, not your Marcus the Millhaven one's irrelevant. The man in the photograph is named Dennis Farr. He works for Raymond Cass." Jackson looked at the photograph, then at Marcus. "Why is Cass interested in a community center in Millhaven?" "He's not interested in the community center," Marcus said. "He's interested in what the community center tells him about you. Cass is smart, Jackson. He put it together, the anonymous foundation, the timing, the location. He knows you were in Millhaven. He's been trying to figure out why." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "And he found her." The coal in Jackson's chest became something hotter. "What does that mean?" Jackson said. His voice was very quiet. "It means Cass now has a name, Kylie Ellison. It means he knows she mattered enough to you to fund her program anonymously from 3 organizational layers deep." Marcus held his gaze. "And it means she is absolutely a liability whether you want her to be or not." Jackson stood up. He was already moving, picking up his phone, his jacket, his keys, before he had consciously made the decision to move, which was not how he operated, which told him something about the degree to which this had left the category of calculation. "Where are you going?" Marcus said. "Millhaven." "Jackson, if you go back there now, you confirm everything Cass thinks he knows about—" "Get me Cass's location," Jackson said, "tonight, and put 2 men on Briar Street until I say otherwise." "Jackson." He stopped at the door, turned around, looked at Marcus with the specific quality of attention he reserved for things he needed to say only once. "This is the other thing I said we'd discuss when I got back," he said. "The woman in the lobby, 14 months ago, the one you put on the floor in front of a child." Marcus went very still. "I should have said something then," Jackson said. "I didn't, because you were useful and I was comfortable. And I told myself the discomfort of looking at it was the same as dealing with it, which it wasn't. That's on me." He held Marcus's gaze. "But it stops here. The way you look at people who you've decided don't matter, that ends. I will not have it representing me. I will not have it associated with my name, and I will not have it anywhere near people I care about." He let that land. "Do you understand me?" Marcus looked at him for a long moment. The expression on his face was complicated, something that wasn't quite shame, and wasn't quite defiance, and was mostly the look of a man who had believed his behavior was invisible and has just discovered it was seen all along. "Understood," Marcus said, quietly. Jackson left. He drove the 2 hours back to Millhaven in 94 minutes, which was information about his state of mind that he didn't need any help interpreting. He called Dominic on the way and said 3 things. Confirm Cass's men are on Briar Street. Put someone on Kylie's building tonight, and don't tell Marcus which building. He arrived in Millhaven at 7:41 in the evening. He sat in the car outside her building for 4 minutes. Then he got out and knocked on her door. She opened it after a long enough pause that he knew she had looked through the peephole and made a decision. She was wearing a worn gray sweatshirt, and her hair was down, and she had the look of a person who had been sitting with something heavy and had gotten tired of sitting. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. She did not move to let him in, but she did not close the door. She stood there and looked at him with an expression he could not categorize, because he had never seen it on her face before, something careful and something hurt, and something underneath both of those that was still, despite everything, paying attention. "You searched my name," he said. Her jaw tightened slightly. "You heard a name," she said. "Through a window. You weren't supposed to hear it. I know. And Jax Maroro doesn't exist." "No," he said, "he doesn't." The word landed between them like something dropped from a height. She absorbed it. She didn't look away. This, he thought, was the thing about her. She did not look away from things, even when looking away would have been easier, even when looking away would have been justified. "Come in," she said, not warmly, not coldly, just directly. He came in. Her apartment was small and full of books, and entirely without pretense, and he sat on the edge of a chair that she gestured to, and she sat on the couch across from him with her arms folded and her feet flat on the floor like a person who wanted to be anchored. "Tell me," she said. So he did. He did not do it efficiently. He did not do it the way he presented information in conference rooms, clean and structured and pre-organized for maximum effect. He did it the way a man does it when he is telling the truth, for the first time in a long time, about something he has needed to say haltingly, with wrong turns, with the occasional long pause when he couldn't find the words and had to wait for them to find him. He told her about the Tuesday evening in his office, about the question he couldn't stop asking. He told her about Dominic and the apartment and the apron and the 6 weeks. He told her about the children's books on the side table that he hadn't moved because he couldn't make himself move them. He told her about the grant and why, and that she had deserved it long before he ever got involved. He told her about Marcus. Not everything, not the full geometry of what Marcus was, but the lobby, the laugh, the woman on the floor, the child screaming, and the glass of whiskey he hadn't touched all night afterward. He did not tell her about Raymond Cass. Not yet. He would, but not yet. She listened to all of it. She did not interrupt. Her expression moved through things as he spoke, not performed emotion, not reaction, calibrated for his benefit, just the genuine movement of a person's face when it is processing something real. When he stopped, the silence lasted long enough to have weight. "Why me?" she said. Her voice was level. "Of everyone you could have watched, observed, tested, why were you even in that store?" "I wasn't testing you," he said. "That's what I need you to understand. You weren't the experiment. The experiment was me, whether I could be a person without all of it, whether anyone would see something worth seeing." He paused. "You weren't the test. You were the answer." She looked at him steadily. "That's a very clean way to say it." "I know." Clean doesn't mean it didn't hurt. Her voice didn't shake. It was simply honest. "I talked to you. I told you things. I let you into the program, into the room with the kids, into conversations that were real to me." She paused. "And you were lying the whole time, not about big things maybe, but about the thing that contains all the other things, which is who you are." "Yes," he said. "I was." She looked at her hands, looked back at him. "Why are you here tonight? Why did you come back?" He thought about the photograph on the tablet, about Dennis Farr and Raymond Cass, and the fact that his world had found her even in the place he had gone specifically to be away from his world. He thought about whether to tell her and understood that not telling her was the same shape of wrong as everything else he'd done, and that he had used that reasoning once already tonight with himself, and the cost of it stretched out was not something he could continue to afford. "Because someone from my world found out you matter to me," he said. "And that makes you visible in ways that are not safe. I came back to tell you that, and to tell you I'm sorry, and because—" He stopped. "Because I needed you to hear it from me before you heard it from somewhere else." She was quiet for a long time. Outside a car went by. Somewhere in the building, a door closed. "How not safe?" she said. "Not immediately," he said. "I have people on your building tonight." She blinked. "You have people on my—" She stopped. Something moved through her expression that he hadn't seen there before. Not fear, something more complicated than fear. "Kylie, I teach children to read," she said, flat. "I teach children to read in a back room of a grocery store. I do not have people." She exhaled. "I do not live in a world where the phrase people on your building means something ordinary." "No," he said. "You don't, and I'm sorry that my world is touching yours." She stood up. She walked to the window, not to look out, just to move to put some distance between herself and the chair where he was sitting. She stood with her back to him for a moment. He waited. He was good at waiting. Always had been, but this was a different kind of waiting, not strategic, not controlled. Just sitting in the uncertainty of a thing he could not manage and would not try to. She turned around. "The kids are at the community center on Saturday," she said. 12 kids, 3 new ones." Her voice was carefully steady. "Is Saturday a problem?" He looked at her. "No, Saturday is not a problem." "And you'll make sure?" "I will make sure." She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't know what she was deciding. He didn't try to predict it. He just let her look. "You funded the program," she said. "That was real." It was real. The reading, with Priya, with Darnell, with Leon, that was real. "That was the most real thing I've done in years," he said. She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. "I don't know what to do with you, Jackson Harro." Chung, he heard his name, his actual name in her mouth, and it did something to him that none of the other things had done, something that landed in a place where he hadn't known there was space. "I'm not asking you to do anything with me," he said. "I'm just asking you to know the truth, and to let me make sure you're safe, and after that, whatever you decide, I'll respect it." She looked at him. Something in her face shifted. Not forgiveness. He wasn't naive enough to call it that yet, and she was not a woman who moved that quickly on things that mattered. But something, the beginning of something that might, with time and honesty and a great deal of patience, become something. "You should know something," she said, "about the grant I applied for, the one that rejected me." "I know," he said. "Dominic told me. I'm sorry that happened." She shook her head. "That's not what I was going to say." She paused. "I was going to say that when I got rejected, I didn't stop. I found another way. I always find another way." She looked at him steadily. "I want you to know that, because whatever this is, I am not someone who needs saving. I was fine before you got here, and I will be fine regardless of what comes next." "I know," he said. "That's not why I came back." "Then why?" she said again, softer this time. He answered her the only way left that was honest. "Because I couldn't not," he said. The silence after that was different from all the other silences. It was not comfortable, and it was not resolved, and it did not mean everything was all right. But it was real. It was the silence of 2 people who have moved past performance and into the territory of things that actually matter, which is always quieter and always harder and always, without exception, worth more. She walked to the kitchen. She came back with 2 mugs of tea, the kind of practical, unremarked gesture that meant she was not sending him away yet. She set one in front of him. She sat back on the couch. "Tell me what you're actually dealing with," she said. "Not the cleaned-up version." He looked at the mug, at her, at the straight, honest line of her, the way she faced things directly without flinching, without requiring the world to be easier than it was. He picked up the mug, and he told her about Raymond Cass. She listened to all of it without moving. Not the cleaned-up version. Not the version he gave Dominic or Marcus or the partners who needed reassurance. The actual version, Raymond Cass, the Eastern Corridor, Benedetti, the photograph of Marcus outside her community center, Dennis Farr, the fact that a man with considerable resources and no particular conscience had connected her name to Jackson's and was already deciding how to use it. When he finished, she set her mug down on the table. "So what happens now?" she said. I handle Cass, Jackson said. I've been handling men like Cass my entire adult life. He made a move, I blocked it, and now he's looking for leverage. When he finds out the leverage doesn't work, that coming near you produces consequences he's not prepared for, he'll redirect. And if he doesn't redirect, he will. She looked at him. That's not an answer. It's the truest one I have right now. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that he hadn't expected, which was the thing she nearly always did. Were you ever planning to tell me before any of this happened? Before Cass? Before the search? Were you going to tell me who you were? He held her gaze. He owed her the real answer, not the comfortable one. I don't know, he said. I wanted to. I came close more than once, but every time I got close I thought about what happened after, about the way the truth would change the shape of everything, and I stopped. He paused. That was cowardice. I want to be honest about that. She absorbed it. She did not tell him it was fine. She did not soften it for him. She just sat with the truth of it, which was exactly what he had come to expect from her, and which still somehow surprised him every time. The grant, she said. Before you tell me anything else, did I earn it, or did you give it to me because of this? She gestured between them, indicating the unnamed thing that was not yet a thing, the territory they were both standing in without a map. You applied for it 6 weeks before I got to Millhaven, he said. You did the paperwork. You made the case. You were rejected by someone who made a decision without reading what you wrote, which I know because Dominic pulled the file and the rejection was automatic, a size threshold your application didn't meet because the program was too small. What I did was remove a bureaucratic obstacle from something that had already been decided on its merits. He held her gaze. You earned it. I just made sure the machinery didn't need it. She looked at him for a long moment. Okay, she said. Just okay. Not absolution, not a clean slate. Just okay, meaning she had heard it, filed it in the correct place, and was ready to move forward. This was the thing about her that undid him over and over, the thing he had not found anywhere else in 41 years of looking. She did not require the world to be simple before she engaged with it. She looked at complicated things and stayed. I have 12 kids on Saturday, she said again, and I meant what I asked. I need to know they're safe. They're safe, he said. I promise you that. She nodded once. Then she picked her mug back up and looked into it and said quietly to the mug, more than to him, I don't know what to do with how angry I am at you. You don't have to do anything with it right now. I know. She looked up. But it's there. I want you to know it's there. Because I'm not the kind of person who pretends things aren't happening, and if something is going to exist between us at any point, it has to exist on the same foundation as everything else. I build things on which is honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, even when the honest thing is that I don't know yet. That's fair, he said. It's not about fair. She almost smiled, but it didn't quite make it all the way. It's just how I am. He drove back to Chicago at midnight with 2 of Dominic's people in a separate car 3 minutes behind him because Cass's interest in Millhaven had not been formally resolved, and Jackson did not leave things formally unresolved when the thing at stake was someone else's safety. He called Dominic on the drive. She knows, he said. Dominic said nothing for a moment. Everything. Enough. We'll see about the rest. How is she? Jackson looked at the road ahead of him. Dark and straight, and stretching further than his headlights could reach. Better than she should be, he said. Better than I deserve. Dominic had the wisdom not to comment on that. The week that followed was the fastest and the most brutal of the year. Raymond Cass called his partner summit on Wednesday. He sent formal notification to 12 names, including 2 of Jackson's Benedetti and a man named Kraus, who had been quiet enough that Jackson had underestimated him. The notification was politely worded and professionally disastrous. It framed the summit as a routine structural review, but the subtext was a knife, leadership continuity, accountability, the reliability of the Harro name. Jackson read the notification once and called Marcus. I'm going, he said. I know, Marcus said. I want full attendance confirmed before we walk in. I don't want Cass to know how many of the room are still with us until we're already there. Understood. A pause. Jackson, about what you said last week, in the office. Jackson waited. "You were right," Marcus said. It came out flat, which was the only way Marcus was capable of saying things that cost him. About the woman in the lobby, about how I move through the world. A silence. "I have been thinking about it." "Good," Jackson said, and he meant it without cruelty, which was a thing he had not always been capable of. "Keep thinking." He hung up. He thought about Kylie. He thought about her constantly in the spaces between decisions, in the brief silences between one call and the next. He did not call her because she had not asked him to call her, and he was trying with the considerable discipline of a man who had spent 20 years deciding what everyone else would do next to not decide this one, to let her come to it in her own time at her own temperature. She called him on Thursday morning. He picked up before the second ring, which was information about himself that he accepted without argument. "The community center called," she said. "They want to meet about the expansion, adding a second program, older kids, teenagers, focused on writing instead of reading." She paused. "It would need more funding than what the trust already committed." He opened his mouth. "I'm not asking you for money," she said quickly. "I want to be clear about that. I'm asking if you know anyone in Chicago who runs legitimate foundation work because I want to apply the right way this time, with full knowledge of who's on the other end of the table." He was quiet for a moment. "I know several people. I'll send you 3 names today. All vetted, all real, all people who will read what you actually wrote." "Thank you." A pause. "How are you?" "Busy. There's a summit in 2 days." "The Cass thing?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, slow and steady, and it was the most grounding thing he had experienced all week. "Be careful," she said. Not dramatically, just sincerely. "I will," he said. And then, because she had asked him for honesty, and he was trying, "I'd like to see you after, when it's done, if that's something you're open to." The pause was not long, but it was real. "Ask me when it's done," she said. "I'll know better then." It was the right answer. He knew it was the right answer. It didn't make the waiting easier, but it was right. And he had learned slowly, imperfectly late, that right and easy were not the same country. The summit was on a Friday evening in a hotel conference room on Michigan Avenue that had been chosen for its neutrality and its exits, both of which Jackson's people had assessed before anyone else arrived. 12 men came. Jackson counted 11 before he sat down. Krause was not there. He noted it, did not mention it. Sat at the head of the table, which was not specifically designated as his, but which no one moved to take when he walked in, because 20 years of a certain kind of reputation meant that some things did not need to be said. Raymond Cass sat at the far end. He was composed, well-dressed, patient in the way that very dangerous things are patient, like he had all the time in the world, like he had decided the outcome already and was waiting for the room to understand it. He was, Jackson acknowledged without pleasure, good at this. He had built his position on the slow accumulation of other people's doubt, and he had spent 6 weeks cultivating it carefully. He opened the summit with a question about continuity. Jackson let him finish. Then he talked for 8 minutes, not loudly, not aggressively. He talked the way he always talked in rooms like this, with the weight of someone who has never needed the room to agree with him in order to proceed, which was the specific quality that made the room always agree with him. He talked about the Eastern Corridor, about Benedetti, about the structural decisions he had made in the past 3 weeks, and the outcomes those decisions had already produced about the next 6 months, and exactly where each man in the room stood to benefit from the architecture Jackson was building. He did not address Cass directly. He addressed the room. By the time he finished, 8 of the 11 men were leaning forward. The remaining 3 were looking at Cass. Cass looked at Jackson. "You were absent for 6 weeks, Cass said. Without notification, without a named interim. That's a structural vulnerability, regardless of the outcome." "I was gone," Jackson said. "The structure held. That's not a vulnerability. That's evidence of a structure that works." He let a beat pass. "If you're making an argument, Raymond, make it. If you're asking a question, ask it. But stop talking around the thing you came here to say." The room went very still. Cass looked at him for a long moment. He was recalibrating. Jackson could see the exact moment he did it, the slight shift. The eyes moving fractionally left the jaw tightening and releasing. Cass had come to this room with Kraus as his confirmed ally and had expected 3 others to be movable. Without Kraus in the room, the math was wrong. He had known it the moment he sat down. He had been hoping Jackson wouldn't notice. "I think," Cass said slowly, "that the questions I came here with have been adequately addressed." "Good," Jackson said. "Then we're done." He stood up. The room stood up. The meeting, which Cass had spent 3 weeks engineering, lasted 41 minutes. In the elevator afterward, Marcus said, "Kraus." "Already handled," Jackson said. "He'll be in touch by Monday with a formal recommitment. The conversation happened yesterday." Marcus looked at him. "You knew Cass had Kraus when you walked in." "I knew Cass thought he had Kraus," Jackson said. "Those are different things." Marcus said nothing for a moment. Then, and this was the thing Jackson noted filed and would not forget, "I should have seen Kraus 3 weeks ago. I was looking at the wrong things." It was not an apology. Marcus did not make apologies. But it was an acknowledgement. Quiet, direct, honest. And it was, Jackson thought, the most useful thing Marcus had said to him in a long time. "We'll recalibrate," Jackson said. "Together." He meant it, and Marcus, who had known him for 11 years and could read the difference between what Jackson meant and what Jackson said when those things weren't the same, nodded once. He called Kylie from the car. She picked up on the 3rd ring. "How did it go?" "It's done," he said. A pause. He could hear the quality of her silence, that present, grounded attention that was entirely hers. "Good," she said. "You said to ask you when it was done." Another pause. Longer. He held the phone and looked at the city going by and made himself be still in the way he had learned to be still in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, which was a different kind of still from boardroom still. "Saturday," she said finally. "The kids have their first session at the community center. Come." A beat. "Not as a donor, not as Jackson Harro. Just come, read a book, do the voices." He exhaled. Something in his chest that had been held at compression for 10 days released slowly, like a door opened against pressure. "I'll be there," he said. He was there at 9:45. He was early because he was always early when it mattered, and this mattered. The community center on Briar Street smelled like fresh paint and new carpet, and the particular electric anticipation of a space that has never yet been used for its purpose. 12 kids arrived over the next 15 minutes, including Leon, who came in with his arms still crossed, but whose eyes were moving around the room with an interest he had not yet decided to admit to. Priya arrived last running, holding a book above her head like a torch. "Jax!" She said it the way children say the names of people they have already decided belong to them. He crouched down. "Hey, kid." She thrust the book at him, a new one, a story about a girl who builds a bridge from things other people threw away. "This one," she said. "You have to read this one." "Okay," he said. "I'll read it." She was already running to find a spot. He stood up. Kylie was watching from across the room. She was wearing the yellow cardigan again. He didn't know if she knew that or if it was just what she reached for on days like this, days that mattered. And she had her glasses pushed up on her head, and she was holding a clipboard, and she looked as she always looked, like someone who was entirely at home inside her own life. She looked at him. Something in her expression was different from the last time he'd seen her in person. Not warmer exactly, not cooler, just more settled, like she had worked something through in the time between and had arrived somewhere real. "You came," she said. "I came," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "I owe you something," she said. He shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "I'm not talking about money." She looked at him steadily. "I spent a week being angry, and I want to be fair about why. The anger was real, the lie was real. But I've been thinking about what you said about the question you were trying to answer, about whether anyone could see you without the weight of everything behind the name. And I think—" She stopped, started again. "I think that's not a ridiculous question. I think that's a profoundly human question. I think I would have asked it too if I were you." She paused. "I'm not saying the way you went about it was right. I'm saying I understand why." He looked at her. He felt something settle into place that had been loose for a very long time. "Kylie, I'm not done," she said. "I understand why. And I'm telling you that so you know. But I need you to understand something in return." She held his gaze direct and clear. "I am not a test. I am not an answer to a question. I am a person. And if this is going to be something, it's going to be between two people who are both fully present. No experiments, no construction, just real." "Yes," he said, without hesitation, without strategy. "Just yes." She nodded, like that was what she had needed to hear, and she had heard it. "Okay then," she said. "Go read to the children." He went. He read about the girl who built a bridge from discarded things. He did the voices, all of them, including the skeptical old man at the beginning who didn't think the bridge would hold, and the small sound of wind the girl heard when she was almost done, and the rumble of the first footstep across it. Priya sat beside him and corrected his inflection twice. Darnell read a whole page by himself without stopping. Leon, halfway through, moved from the back of the room to the edge of the circle, and then by the last chapter into it. He did not announce it. He just moved. Kylie, watching from the doorway, said nothing, just watched. Jackson caught her eye once over the top of the book, and she looked at him with that expression, the one he had spent weeks cataloging, and still had no single word for the one that was just her paying attention the way only she knew how. When the session ended and the room filled with the noise of 12 children who had somewhere else to be and coats to find, and grown-ups to report to Jackson helped fold the new chairs better than the old ones, with actual padding, and stack them against the wall. Kylie worked beside him. They didn't speak for a while. They didn't need to. Priya, on her way out the door, stopped and looked back at both of them, with the unself-conscious assessment of a 5-year-old who has decided something. "Are you friends?" she asked. Kylie looked at Jackson. Jackson looked at Kylie. "We're working on it," Kylie said. Priya considered this. "Okay," she said, satisfied. And she left. When the last child was gone and the room was quiet, they stood on opposite sides of the folding table, and the table between them was the exact right distance, close enough for honesty, far enough for choice. He thought about what she had said. "I am not a test. I am not an answer. I am a person." He thought about what he had answered and meant. "What happens now?" he said. She tilted her head. "You go handle your world," she said. "I handle mine. And we see if there's a version of this that works honestly." She looked at him directly. "I'm not asking you to give anything up. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm asking you to be exactly what you are with me openly, and see if that's something we can both build something on." "Yes," he said again. Still without strategy, still without hesitation. She smiled. Not the polite smile, and not the delighted laugh smile, and not even the warm, private nod from across a room full of children. Something quieter, something that was only for him. "Come on," she said. "I'll buy you a terrible cup of coffee from the machine in the lobby, and you can tell me about what actually happens when someone like Cass backs down, because I'm curious, and you said no more cleaned-up versions." He followed her out of the room. 3 months after that Saturday, Raymond Cass withdrew from the Eastern Corridor entirely. The details of why were not publicly available, and would not be. But Benedetti called Jackson on a Tuesday to say that Cass had reached out to initiate a quiet separation, his word separation, the word people in their world used when they meant retreat, and that the name had not come up again since. Marcus was different, not transformed. Jackson was not naive enough to believe in transformation, not in men like Marcus, not quickly, but different. He had started without being asked to handle certain situations differently, quieter, with less of the casual brutality that had always been his default instrument. Jackson did not comment on it. He noticed it and said nothing, and let it continue, because change that needs to be praised is not yet change, it's performance. The reading program at Briar Street expanded in its 4th month to include 16 children on Thursdays and 14 on Saturdays. Kylie applied to 2 foundations on her own with the names Jackson had given her and was accepted by both. She told him about it over the phone with a satisfaction in her voice that he recognized as the specific satisfaction of a person who has done a thing correctly and knows it. "Both of them," he said. "Both of them." He could hear her smiling. "Turns out when someone actually reads the application, you were always worth reading," he said. A pause. Not uncomfortable. The kind of pause that is just a person receiving something they didn't expect and taking a moment to hold it. "Come on Saturday," she said. Leon finished his first chapter book. He was there at 9:45. They sat together in the quiet of the room after the children had gone on the floor, the way they always ended up, because neither of them seemed inclined to be formal about it. She had her back against the wall. He had his legs stretched out. There was a stack of books between them and a cold cup of coffee from the lobby machine that neither of them had finished. "I've been thinking about something," she said. "Tell me." "You asked yourself a question," she said. "On a Tuesday night in your office, whether anyone would stay if you had nothing." She paused. "I've been thinking about the answer. Because the answer isn't really about nothing, is it? You weren't nothing. You were still yourself. The question was whether yourself was enough." He looked at her. She was looking at the wall, thinking it through. "And the answer," she continued, "is yes, clearly, unambiguously. But I want you to hear the reason." She turned and looked at him directly. "It's not because you were kind to the kids, though you were. It's not because you funded the program because I didn't know that. It's not because of the scared voice or the avocados or any of it individually." She held his gaze. "It's because you were present. Every time you were in that room, you were actually in it. Not performing, not managing, not calculating, just in it. And that," she paused, "that is rarer than $400 million. I want you to know that." And he was quiet for a long moment. "I know it now," he said. Outside the community center, the city moved in its ordinary way, unhurried, indifferent, full of people asking their own questions about their own lives. It moved without them and would move without them tomorrow and the day after. Which was the thing about ordinary life that Jackson had always found uncomfortable and had come in the last 4 months to find deeply consoling. The world did not require him. It did not require either of them. It simply offered itself imperfect, complicated, unmanageable, and asked if they were willing to be in it honestly. They were. He reached over and moved the stack of books off the space between them. She looked at the space, looked at him, and without ceremony, without drama, without any of the performance he had spent his life mistaking for connection, she leaned her shoulder against his. That was all. That was everything. Jackson Harro, who had built an empire on the premise that nothing in the world was given freely, who had spent 41 years believing that love was always at its core, a transaction sat on the floor of a community center in Millhaven, shoulder to shoulder with a woman who had sat with him at his worst and asked for nothing in return, and understood completely and without remainder that he had been wrong about the most important thing. Love was not a transaction. It was not leverage. It was not the thing you built to protect yourself from the world. It was the thing that made the world worth building anything for at all. And he had found it not in spite of becoming nothing, but because he had finally, for the first time in his life, been brave enough to be exactly himself. That was enough. That would always be enough. And both of them knew it.